defects in the system of law enforcement and permit the individual to get away with it.
Oftentimes you're dealing with people that have no criminal background whatsoever. It's more of an emotional type of crime.
It was a pattern that somebody should have looked at.
Murders do not come out in the dark with long teeth and saliva dripping off the chin.
Every piece of evidence works together to make a whole complete picture.
I wouldn't even call her a black widow. I would call her just a greedy assassin.
The inherent shortcomings of law enforcement make detection of crime, solution of crime, an extremely difficult process.
The Uncompahgre National Forest in western Colorado is known for its large hunting area with big game animals. People travel from all over the United States to camp during hunting season. It's located 1 hour south from Montrose, an hour and a half south from Delta, and 5.5 hours southwest from Denver. Born November 6, 1946, Bruce Dodson served 4 years in the Navy during the Vietnam War, after which he started his career as a medical technologist at the Delta County Memorial Hospital in Colorado. Janice Dodson was born July 17, 1951. She told friends she didn't have the best relationship with her family. She left home and married at an early age to escape the chaos. Janice was an avid hunter and had been hunting since she was a child. Her family would go on hunting trips into the wilderness when she was younger. Bruce and Janice were married on July 15, 1995. On October 15, 1995, 3 months after marrying, Janice and Bruce were camping in the Uncompahgre National Forest, getting ready for the start of hunting season. They arrived at the forest 2 nights before after Janice had suggested the two take the trip. While Bruce wasn't thrilled with the idea of the trip, as he had never even fired a rifle, he wanted to make his new wife happy, so he agreed to go. This would be Bruce's first trip into the forest, and he wanted to spend time with his new wife. They had spent the previous day out hunting and were getting ready for their second day. Around 9:30 a.m., a man who was camping close to Janice and Bruce heard a woman screaming for help. He ran in the direction of the yelling and found Janice standing over a man's body laying on the ground. She was yelling, "Why didn't you have your vest on?" while holding an orange vest and waving it in the air. When he got closer to the injured man, he noticed that the man was laying face down with both arms down by his sides. He noticed a hunting rifle on the ground beside him and 3 empty shell casings laying near his body. The man had a noticeable bullet wound in his back. Janice informed him that this was her husband, Bruce. He described the scene.
I could tell that, he was deceased, and I looked at her and told her, I said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry." I said, "But he's gone." He's a man walking upright through grass 4 inches tall. He's got a hunter orange cap on. He's carrying a rifle. The only thing that could have happened in this world would have been a 1 in a million chance of somebody a canyon over shooting at an animal and a stray bullet hitting him.
The man checked his neck for a pulse but was unable to feel anything and informed Janice that Bruce was no longer alive. He said the best thing to do at this point would be to call authorities. The man jumped in his truck to find the nearest line of communication as they were in a remote location. He soon came upon a man standing on the side of the road with a cell phone, pretty rare in 1995, who was able to dial 911.
I'm up on the Divide Road, and there's a man been shot and killed up here. When did this happen, sir? I don't know. I'm just up here, and a guy came in and said that them his camps or someone dead. Like suicide or somebody dead? We don't know.
Why did the operator automatically assume suicide? She was so quick to associate a gunshot with suicide. The man with the phone then passed the phone to the man who flagged him down to explain the situation.
Go ahead, sir. And there's a man been shot and killed up here? Today? Yes. And his wife here, she's going crazy.
The man who went for help was Doug. He and his friend Michael were at a campsite not far from Bruce and Janice. The 2 men were off-duty police officers from Texas starting off their 3rd day of camping on their week-long trip to Colorado. Doug decided to have a nap after breakfast instead of hunting with Michael since he had caught a deer the day before and wanted to clean it. He wasn't in the tent long when he heard a gunshot that seemed too close to his campsite. Then he heard someone yelling who he thought was celebrating, but then he heard a second shot and a third shot, and the yelling stopped. With many hunters in the area, it was hard for him to know exactly what he was hearing, so he stayed in the tent just to be safe. When he thought the shooting was done, he exited the tent and started cleaning the deer. About 30 minutes later, he saw a woman in hunting gear walking to a nearby campsite. When he was halfway through his task, he heard someone come up behind him, compliment his deer, and introduce herself as Janice Dodson. He was sure this was the same woman he had just saw in hunting gear and asked if she had heard the gunshots earlier, to which she said she had not heard anything. She informed Doug that her husband was out hunting and that she was waiting for him to come back. After a brief conversation, she said she was going to go look for her husband. A few minutes later, around 9:30 a.m., that's when Doug heard Janice screaming for help. After calling 911, he returned to his campsite to await the authorities. Since the area was so rural, authorities didn't arrive until close to noon. When they did, Doug returned to the scene with them and noticed it was quite different from when he had left to get help.
The deputy let me walk him down, and when I got to the spot with him, I immediately stopped and I said, well, this is different. I said, this is not the way I left this. He was face down when I left, and when I got back, he was laying on his back. And he's covered up with a blanket. She covered him up, trying to keep him warm until help got there. Different people act different ways when they're expressing grief. You know, here they are in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, and this is her husband, and he's laying here dead. As an officer coming to a scene, you want to see it as raw as you can find it. Everything on that scene tells you a part of the story. And once you disturb that, that disturbs the story.
Next to Bruce's body was an orange hunter's vest and an orange ball cap. The vest had 2 holes in the back of it as if the material was scrunched together as a bullet passed through it. No blood was found on it, suggesting Bruce removed the vest before being shot through the torso. Investigators found 3 shell casings on the ground near Bruce's body, leading them to believe the shots were fired where they were found. Doug explains why it was not possible for Bruce to have shot himself.
He sure didn't commit suicide. How does a man shoot himself in the back, with a long rifle, much less ejecting 3 shells?
It was believed that Bruce fired 3 of his own shots in the air while being shot at and waving his vest at the same time to get the unknown shooter's attention. This would explain the multiple shots Doug heard while in his tent. When investigators spoke with Janice, she said that she and Bruce started their day at 5 a.m. She said they used the same hunting strategy as they had the previous day, which was to have her chase the animals down out of the bushes and trees at the top of the hill, while Bruce stood down at the bottom of the hill to shoot the animals as they descended the hill. She said they planned to meet back at the campsite around 9:30 a.m. She said she went to the campsite earlier than scheduled to change her clothes after getting muddy in a swamp. They asked her if they could collect her boots and the clothing she had been wearing that day, and she agreed. Janice said she went looking for Bruce when he didn't return to their camp, and that's when she found him laying on the ground not far from there. She went on to tell police that she saw a hunter wearing camouflage, which was strange for hunting season, as most hunters would be wearing their orange and yellow hunting vests to protect themselves from being mistaken as an animal. Doug explains what took place when police asked Janice more about the camouflaged hunter.
She got very quiet and she began shaking. One of the Forest Service police came out with an oxygen bottle and a mask and a med kit, and they went to working on her, and pretty soon they were calling for a helicopter to come get her.
Janice was airlifted to the hospital, and Bruce was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Investigators took Janice's hunting gear in for evidence, which included her .270 caliber rifle. Bruce's rifle was also taken in as evidence. By the end of the day, when it was starting to get dark, investigators were just about through with their examination of the crime scene until the next day, when Doug's hunting partner Michael returned from hunting just as they were finishing. One of the officers approached him and asked his name and where he had been, then informed him that there had been a shooting. At first, Michael thought Doug might have been the victim, but the officer informed him that Doug was currently a possible suspect. Doug explained the officer's line of questioning and in which direction they were focusing their attention.
The deputy that had originally responded asked me to come to his vehicle and sit in his vehicle with him and give him a statement. It became a little more intense there for a while after that on the questioning. They asked a lot of questions of me, like, do y'all know each other somehow? They were looking at me and going, is this a dirty cop?
has he gone up there and killed a man for a woman?
Michael told police where he had been hunting and for how long. He said that he had Doug's gun with him in the truck while he was out hunting all day, which helped shift the focus off of Doug. Bruce's autopsy was performed the next day on October 16, 1995, by Chief Medical Examiner Tom Canfield. Tom said Bruce wasn't a stranger to him.
Bruce worked for me. He was a medical technologist in the Delta Hospital, and I knew him very well, both on a professional and a personal level. Emotionally, to perform an autopsy on a friend is difficult, but it goes with the territory. You need to do it. You need to do a good job.
Tom found that Bruce wasn't solely shot once in the back, but 3 times, and that the shots came from a long distance. The first shot was believed to have grazed his back as it went through his hunting vest. Bruce probably felt the bullet and took the vest off to see if something was inside, like a bug. Realizing there was a hole in the vest, he turned around and started waving it up in the air, hoping the shooter would see him in case they were mistaking him for an animal. That's when the second shot was believed to have entered his chest and exited under his right arm. Once on the ground, Bruce may have tried crawling away from the area, but was shot a 3rd time from an upward trajectory in the back where the bullet lodged in his lung. It's believed that Bruce could have survived if he hadn't been shot a 3rd time. The bullet in his lung was identified as a .243 caliber, which was determined not to come from Janice or Bruce's guns. Tom explains how he was able to determine the weapon used to kill Bruce was a hunting rifle.
A hunting rifle is a high-powered rifle that uses usually soft-tipped or hollow-tipped bullets so that it will expand and do damage to the heart of the animal you're shooting at.
Tom concluded the shooting was no accident.
Well, I was able to determine, one, that they were distant-range gunshot wounds. That is, they were fired from a significant distance. I was able to conclude, beyond a reasonable doubt and with reasonable medical certainty, that Bruce died from multiple gunshot wounds, and it was clearly a homicide. Called the sheriff's office in Mesa County and said, "We do not have an accident, we have a homicide."
While Tom was conducting the autopsy, investigators continued to search the scene. They discovered a hole in a fence post close to where Bruce was found that was thought to have come from one of the bullets that hit him. Investigators traced the path of the bullet with twine from where Bruce was found, through the post, then past the post, hoping it would lead them to the shooter's position at the time of the shooting. Once they traced it back to where the shooter would have been standing, about 80 yards away from the post, they found a shoe print that may have belonged to the shooter, so it was collected as evidence. When they used a metal detector to search the area, they happened to find 2 .308 caliber shell casings lying next to one another. They didn't match the casings found by Bruce's body, the couple's rifle, nor Doug or Michael's guns. As they stood in the spot of the shooter, they noticed how they had a clear view of where Bruce was standing. The weather on that day was clear, so it didn't seem likely that a hunter would have mistaken Bruce for an animal due to foggy conditions. When they traced the twine beyond where Bruce was found, they used a metal detector to search the area and were able to find a .308 caliber bullet that had passed through him. With 2 different sized bullets found at the scene, the .243 found inside Bruce and the .308 bullet found in the field, along with the .308 casings at the shooter's position, investigators thought it was possible they were looking for 2 shooters. They searched the fields for the rifle that could have been used to shoot the .308 caliber bullet, but were unable to find one. The snow in the area made it hard for searchers to reach some of the spots they wanted to scour. After searching the areas they could, they decided they would return in the summer when the snow was less of an issue. Investigators decided to pay Janice a visit at the hospital to see if she could give them more information about the camouflaged hunter she saw the previous day. Janice started off by telling them that she and Bruce had planned the trip in that location in hopes of running into her ex-husband's family. She said she was still friends with some of his family members. Investigators asked her if she was planning on seeing her ex-husband, and she said she wasn't sure if he was going to be there or not. She said they didn't end things on the best of terms, adding, "JC didn't care for anybody I ever dated, even after we were divorced." They found it strange that she would plan a trip with her new husband where she knew her ex-husband might also be if they didn't separate on the greatest terms. She couldn't tell them much else about the camouflaged hunter she saw. Investigators were starting to think Janice was holding something back by the statements she was making, leading them to believe that she wasn't being completely truthful. Investigators went to the campsite where Janice's ex-husband's family were camping that weekend. When they arrived, they talked to his brother, who said that JC had been camping in the area with them, but that he and his girlfriend left the previous evening. Investigators realized that JC's family were camping less than a mile away from where Bruce and Janice had been camping. They also noticed that JC's campsite was closer to where Bruce was murdered compared to where the couple were camping. It also seemed odd that she and Bruce would camp close to other hunters, as they had arrived later than the rest of the campers in the area. Usually people like to spread out in such large hunting grounds. Bruce and Janice lived in Delta, Colorado. They met in 1991 when Janice found a job at the Delta Hospital in the medical surgical unit. Her patients enjoyed her company, and her co-workers didn't have anything bad to say about her work performance. This is where she met Bruce, who was working as a medical technologist. Janice eventually found a new job at a hospital in Montrose, Colorado, but still kept in touch with some of her old co-workers, including Bruce. Shortly after her transfer, the two started dating. Bruce had lost his first wife to cancer and mostly kept to himself. Janice had recently went through a divorce, and in the time between relationships, friends said there was a noticeable change in Janice. Her wardrobe, for example, went from casual to more colorful, and she was more outgoing than before. To friends, Bruce seemed happy with Janice and really cared for her. After Bruce's death, some of Bruce's family members found Janice's behavior quite odd for a grieving widow. Bruce's brother explained how they interpreted her behavior.
She threw everything that my brother owned away, had his dog put to sleep, sold his horse, took his name off the mailbox like the next day.
To top it all off, Bruce had asked to be cremated and to have his ashes scattered in Leadville, Colorado. Janice selfishly and without regard dumped Bruce's ashes on the side of the road when she got close to Leadville. When investigators spoke with Janice and Bruce's family and friends, they said she would tell them that she loved her ex-husband, JC, even after marrying Bruce, and that JC was her soulmate. But even so, Bruce and Janice were said to get along well and seemed happy with each other. Janice told friends she didn't have the best relationship with her family and married JC at a young age in her hometown of Texas to escape the chaos of her family. She had tried to make it on her own in Dallas, but was spending more than she was making and had to move home. The cowboy persona JC Lee portrayed was what drew Janice to him. The two had a daughter and a son together, and while things were going well for a while, they could have been better. JC was working as a ranch hand, helping out on different farms, finding work where he could. In 1982, wanting to get out of the house, Janice decided to go to school to become a nurse. In 1990, after 20 years of marriage, Janice and JC divorced. Janice took the breakup pretty rough. She was admitted to the hospital after taking some medication and contemplating death. She then spent some time in the hospital before she was better able to cope with life without JC. Her friend said that Janice still had a close relationship with JC after their divorce. Close enough that Janice had made a trip to Texas 4 months earlier to visit him. On October 18, 1995, investigators traveled to Layton, Utah, where they were able to talk to JC about Bruce's death. They said he seemed friendly and talkative and said he had no knowledge of Bruce's death. He said he and his girlfriend spent the weekend with his family camping and hunting. He brought along a work associate who was able to give investigators the same detailed account of the weekend as JC had given. JC said he didn't know that Janice and Bruce were going to be in the area. While they were talking to him at his kitchen table, they noticed a list of items that seemed to be hunting related, so they asked him what it was for. JC told them he owned a .308 caliber gun, but that it was stolen from his campsite on the night of October 14, 1995, only a few hours before Bruce was killed. JC said he didn't notice the gun was gone until he was back at his apartment in Utah. He told them that whoever stole his gun took .308 caliber bullets as well. When he noticed his gear was stolen, he wrote down what exactly was missing so he wouldn't forget. Investigators were skeptical at first, thinking JC was trying to cover his tracks by saying his weapon was stolen, a weapon with the same size caliber used to kill Bruce. Investigators weren't overly buying his stolen gun story and began to think they were talking to their prime suspect. They asked him if Janice knew where his family campsite was, and he said that he had been camping at the same site for years, and that the last time he knew of Janice being there was with him when they were married 3 years ago. They thought he might be jealous of Janice moving on so fast with Bruce. Investigators wanted to know if JC had a motive to kill Bruce. Apparently, he and Janice had divorced after he started dating one of their daughter's friends. JC told them about an odd conversation he had with Janice in Texas 2 weeks before she married Bruce. He said Janice tried to ask him to be with her again, but he let her know that they were over and that he had moved on with someone else. JC agreed to submit his fingerprints, hoping to clear his name. Before leaving, investigators asked him if he thought Janice would be capable of killing someone, and he told them he wasn't sure. There was no evidence that tied JC to the crime scene other than the .308 caliber bullet found at the scene, which was the same as his stolen gun. Investigators looked into the possibility that Janice had been at JC's campsite and had stolen the gun and bullets, but without Bruce being able to confirm Janice's whereabouts the day before his death, they had to take her word as to her location, leaving them unable to place Janice at her ex-husband's campsite. When investigators looked into the couple's finances, something struck them as suspicious. Janice never had a substantial amount of money before meeting Bruce. Bruce was careful with his money. Janice, not so much. It seemed she had difficulty budgeting the paychecks she was receiving from the hospital as a nurse. When it was time to pay the bills, she would have to ask Bruce to help her out, and he would, but not without reminding her that her spending was getting out of control. He tried to help her to get her finances in order, and when that didn't work, he would refuse her requests for money. It may not have been the lifestyle she was expecting dating a doctor. Bruce's friend Kate described how the pair handled their finances.
Janice's biggest problem was money. She loved to spend money, and Bruce knew where every dime went. He was extremely frugal, and I think that was a real bone of contention between the two of them, was she wanted to spend and he wanted to save. She got a dime in her hand, she'd spend $1.
At one point, after another argument over her high credit card bills, Janice broke up with Bruce and moved out. Friends said Bruce took the breakup pretty hard. Janice decided to give the relationship another try, and the two were back together. Kate described the breakup and the subsequent reunion.
Bruce really went through a hard time when they were split up. He was devastated. I mean, she broke his heart when she left. She wanted to get back with Bruce and quit spending. And so at that point in time, I figured she and Bruce had made everything okay, and they were going to get married. And hopefully the financial thing was a thing of the past.
Janice might have thought their arguments over money would stop once they were married. Investigators found out Janice owed $10,000 in credit card debt a few months before the wedding, and that Bruce had asked her to sign a prenuptial agreement, to which she refused to do. While she was planning a wedding, Janice had a lawyer create a will for Bruce, naming her as the beneficiary. After the wedding, she made sure Bruce put her name on the 2 properties he owned. Within days after the wedding, Janice started the process of having a few life insurance policies taken out on Bruce. In the 3 months they had been married, she was able to accumulate 3 policies on Bruce's life. The policies, combined with his personal assets, were worth almost $495,000. That's how much his life was worth to her. Bruce may have felt that if he continued to argue with her about money, that she would leave again, leading him to agree to her demands. Investigators discovered that Janice had taken a trip to the park a few weeks before her and Bruce went camping. Kate said Janice informed her of the trip before leaving.
She called me and said, I'm going up on the Uncompahgre and I'm going to go hunting. I need some time away and I just need to go think. And I said, well, okay, that's odd. I've never known you to do this before, but okay.
They thought she might have used this as her opportunity to set up her plans for the weekend with Bruce. When investigators spoke to Janice again, they asked her to take a polygraph exam. Janice told investigators she had nothing to do with her husband's death and agreed to take the exam to show she was innocent. On January 17, 1996, at 11:15 a.m., she was hooked up to the machine. The exam can be helpful at clearing innocent people. It can also be a tool for investigators to further interrogate a suspect without asking them questions directly. Most polygraph exams are conducted without a lawyer in the room, but rather they are in an observation room. During an exam, it is only the subject and the administrator in the room to ensure no outside stimuli can affect the subject's physiology. During her examination, Janice said, I grew up with money without the love, okay? When I found Bruce, money became immaterial. From what investigators gathered, Janice didn't grow up with money and suspected she was telling a lie. They also found the statement was out of context and seemed to be only said to serve herself. She was asked several times in several ways if she killed Bruce, and the examiner found that she was being deceptive with her answers.
Did you fire the shot that caused Bruce's death?
No.
It was 3 irrelevant questions and 2 relevant questions. Did you kill Bruce? Are you the one that actually killed Bruce? She did show deceptive on that, there's no doubt.
I'm going to be quite honest with you, showing deceptive on the issues. And I can show you right down the line.
She was confident the whole time, extremely confident. Her ego, I think her ego was very visible. She maintained her story.
I've given you the truth. I did not shoot. I know from the depths of my heart, I did not shoot.
Since they couldn't arrest her on the results of the polygraph alone, she was free to go, but had become the #1 suspect. Janice told investigators she was going to West Texas to stay with a cousin so she could grieve Bruce's death in private. While investigators were looking into Janice's finances, they discovered that her debit card was being used in Lake Charles, Louisiana at a casino. They found out that within the month after Bruce's death, she had cashed in his individual retirement account, closed all his bank accounts, sold his 2 properties, his vehicle, and his horse, Glory. She was also fighting with the insurance companies, demanding they pay her even though the policies didn't cover deaths being investigated as a homicide, only accidental death. Bruce's friend Kate suggested Janice had a motive behind her reckless spending.
After Bruce's death, she just wanted to get rid of everything that, belonged to Bruce, which I thought was odd.
Although she was going through Bruce's money so erratically, they could not arrest Janice on this behavior alone. A little over a year after Bruce's death, Janice married her 3rd husband, Bartlett Hall. The two were married on November 25, 1996, which was Thanksgiving Day in America, and only 11 months after Bruce's death. They had the wedding in Las Vegas at the Chapel of Flowers, still open today in 2020. On April 4th, 1997, when investigators interviewed Janice's new husband Bart, he told them something alarming. He said, "I felt so strong for Janice and for her welfare that after we got married, I took out a $100,000 life insurance policy on myself just to make sure if something happened to me, she was well taken care of." One of the investigators asked Bart, "You don't hunt, do you?" While reviewing the statements taken from the witnesses on the day of Bruce's death, investigators noticed Janice indicated she had changed clothes after falling in a bog. They decided to return to the forest in search of the murder weapon near a bog and a pond located in the area between Janice and JC's campsites. From the summer of 1996 to 1998, investigators would camp in the park to search for the rifle they believed was left behind by Bruce's killer. On June 23, 1998, they invited members of NecroSearch International, hoping they could be of assistance. On this particular trip, investigators focused their search on a pond near JC's campsite. One of the members of NecroSearch pointed out to investigators that the mud around the edge of the pond was bentonite clay and that it was unusual for that particular mineral to be found in the middle of that particular forest. This particular mineral contains metals that are not local to the area and would have had to been placed there by someone. The local ranchers had added the bentonite to the outside of their water supply in order for the water to pool back into the pond during rainfall instead of seeping into the ground. That evening while camping, investigators remembered that the clothing collected from Janice was still in their possession and that they had mud caked on them from what Janice explained was a fall in a pond close to their campsite. Knowing now that bentonite was located in the pond near JC's camp, they thought it might be possible to link Janice to a location she said she had not been that day. Once examined in the lab, it was determined that her clothing contained the same concentration of each component that formed the bentonite. Janice had indicated which pond she fell in, but the samples on her clothing didn't match that particular pond. The only pond in the area that contained bentonite was between their campsite and JC's campsite, leaving investigators to believe Janice had retrieved the gun used to shoot Bruce from JC's campsite. To be certain of the link, clay was gathered from other ponds in the forest, and none were consistent with the concentrations of clay found on Janice's pants, except for that one pond near her ex-husband's campsite. Colorado Bureau of Investigation lab agent Jacqueline Battles explains the process of testing and comparing the soil from various sources.
It's hard to tell dirt from one another, especially in a mountainous area. Initially, everything appears to be some color of brown. There are 2 plastic bags, each containing soil. People think that dirt is dirt. And I took samples of this to show that within 5 feet, The soil can vary tremendously. I got 4 samples from the pond, 2 samples from the bog, and I got 2 samples from her clothing. The results indicated that the clothing matched those of the pond and not those of the bog. That was a big deal. Her story then just fell apart.
Investigators were now able to link Janice to JC's campsite when she said she had not been near it. They suspected that she had stolen the gun from the campsite and had picked up the clay on her pants and boots while she was there. It seemed Janice had tried to set up her ex-husband as the shooter of her current husband, all while taking on the role of the innocent widow. Finally, investigators had the physical evidence they needed to place Janice as Bruce's killer. While they had the clothing out, the treads on Janice's boots were compared to the shoe print taken from the area where the shooter was believed to be standing. The prints were found to be consistent with her boots. Investigators still had to figure out where the .243 caliber bullet recovered from Bruce came from. The answer came when in 1999, one of the investigators on the case was looking through a firearm and ammunition magazine and saw a picture of a .308 caliber bullet split in half after being fired and thought it looked awfully similar to the .243 caliber he saw 3 years earlier. Since the core of the bullet was recovered from Bruce, it looked smaller than it initially was. When they tested both bullets found at the scene and the one found in Bruce to see if they contained the same amount of mineral composition, they turned out to be a match. Now they knew they had one gun that shot multiple bullets at Bruce that day. From the evidence gathered, investigators believe that in the early morning of the day of his death, Janice told Bruce she was going hunting alone, then made her way to JC's campsite. Since the pond was between her campsite and her ex-husband's campsite, Janice crept along the edge of the pond to make sure she wasn't seen. This is how the clay would have gotten on her pants and boots. When she saw that no one was around, she approached the site and stole his .308 rifle and a few bullets. When Bruce left the campsite, Janice waited in the bushes for him to walk by. The first shot grazed him after going through the post, throwing off the trajectory and requiring her to shoot the second shot. Bruce took off his vest to wave it around. That's when Janice shot him the second time. Since he was moving, this shot went through his chest and exited under his right arm. This is when Bruce fell to the ground. Then, Janice shot at Bruce a third time, and the bullet changed shape upon impact. Janice left behind the .308 shell casings, which was later found by investigators from where she had shot Bruce. Although the weapon was not found, it was believed that she somehow disposed of the gun somewhere in the forest before calling for help. It's possible that she had dug a hole somewhere in the area on her previous trip to the forest alone, then buried it after shooting Bruce. Or she could have thrown it into a bog where it could settle under the mud at the bottom. Wayne Bryant, a forensic firearms examiner, said something unsettling about the case.
If the suspect would have been a better shot and Mr. Dodson would have been killed with a single shot, it's possible that this would never have been investigated as a homicide.
The reason this seems rather unusual is the thought that if someone is found with a single bullet, they might investigate it as an accident or a suicide and bypass homicide. But multiple bullets, in this case 3, would indicate that each shot was deliberately fired with the intention of killing. If it were an accident, the shooter may have stopped firing after realizing Bruce was a human. If he killed himself, which in this case would be impossible because of the distance the shots were fired, they could determine to rule it a suicide if only one bullet was found, because they assumed that the person would be dead after the first shot and unable to fire a second shot. Why bypass a homicide investigation? Money. The money it takes to pay the people who investigate the crimes, and the money spent on a trial. The more money they save the state, the happier the officials in the state are with the sheriffs, who are elected based on recommendations and donations from the state authorities and wealthy residents. Luckily, this is an example of a case that was fully investigated. On October 23, 1998, police arrested Janice at her home in Nacogdoches, Texas. Doug recounts what he was told about her arrest.
The district attorney with Mason County said, "We have made an arrest." I said, "Well, did she go peacefully?" He said, "Well, she had a shotgun. When they went in the door, she was hiding behind the bed with it, but thank goodness she didn't use it."
Investigators believe the motive behind her actions was greed and revenge. She married Bruce, took out multiple life insurance policies on him, then killed him for the money. It's believed that when JC told Janice they were over for good, 2 weeks before she married Bruce, this set her off on the path for revenge. At some point, Janice asked Bruce to send JC money to help out her children, to which Bruce refused. This would have given JC a motive to kill Bruce if it looked like JC owed Bruce money. When her house was searched, they found mortuary service documents for Bruce's funeral. The incriminating part of this document was that it was signed on September 24th, 1995, a Sunday, exactly 3 weeks before Bruce died. She thought she could get revenge on her ex-husband by framing him for Bruce's death, while she went on to marry her next potential victim. Her trial began on February 22, 2000. Janice was charged with Bruce's murder and decided to plead not guilty. Prosecutors believed Janice was drowning in debt and saw Bruce as a way out of it, one way or another. On the morning of October 15, 1995, Janice sent Bruce into the field with the intention of shooting him once to make it look like an accident, but the bullet hit the post, sending it through his vest instead of his body. At that point, she was too invested in her plan to turn back, so she continued to shoot until Bruce stopped moving. There was about an hour gap between the shooting and the discovery of his body, in which time it was assumed that Janice changed clothes, dumped the murder weapon, and had a conversation with Doug before notifying him of her husband's state. Since no weapon was recovered, it couldn't be tested. Her motive was the money she would stand to inherit in the event of Bruce's death. She couldn't afford to hire a divorce lawyer. After Bruce's death, Janice had cashed in some of the life insurance policies and was spending it like there was no tomorrow. On March 20th, 2000, after 3.5 days of deliberation, Janice was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Doug explained what one of the investigators said to him after the trial.
One of the DA investigators told me, he said, you know, Doug, he said, this was a God thing. He said, you were put there to make sure she didn't get away with this. And I said, well, if that's my part, then I'm glad I played it.
During the investigation, it was recommended to hunters in the National Forest to wear their hunting vests at all times to avoid hunting accidents. After the trial, hunters were advised to keep their weapons in secured locations and to not share their weapons with other hunters. On April 11, 2002, the appellate court reviewed Janice's request for a retrial. During the trial, the prosecution offered the jury 2 possible theories on how Janice killed Bruce, either with or without JC's help. Janice argued that since one theory would place JC as the shooter instead of herself, she thought the jury should have to all agree and disclose which theory they thought depicted the true events in order to find her guilty of first-degree murder. The judge instructed the jury to base their decision on the evidence presented rather than their belief of who pulled the trigger, and that it had to be a unanimous verdict. The difference between first-degree and second-degree is the intent, and the appellate court refused Janice's request for a retrial because they said the prosecution presented their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and that Janice planned and intended for Bruce to die even if they couldn't place the weapon in her hands due to it never being found. Janice never took the stand at her trial, but decided to tell her side of the story during an interview with Primetime. She said, "I picked up the orange vest and just started screaming at him. Why don't you have your vest on? There was no reason to kill someone like Bruce. And then my second thought was that no one deserves to die like that. I still do love him. The only way I can live with this is that I have the peace of knowing I didn't do it, and the prayer in my heart that someday the truth will win out." Janice has always denied killing Bruce. One of Bruce's friends describes the type of person Bruce is remembered as.
Sad. Very sad. He definitely didn't deserve to have his life taken from him. It was inhumane what happened to him. He deserves to be remembered as a decent and honest man who tried to do the right thing and live a good life and enjoy his life. Unfortunately, that came to an end.
Janice has been incarcerated at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, where she will live out the rest of her life. The most fascinating part of this crime is that it would never have been fully investigated had Janice killed Bruce with the first bullet. It probably would have been ruled accidental. Having a competent medical examiner is an important part in initiating a homicide investigation.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
Here's what's making news.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire.
Murder for hire has been around forever. People believe in their naive state that they can step to somebody else, have them commit the murder.
They think if that guy pulls the trigger, I'm clear.
Right.
The story began after Jeffrey Stern's mistress was arrested and charged with plotting to kill his wife.
An unusual number of people are involved in this murder for hire.
Soon after, 4 others were arrested too. He's one of 5 people now charged in the conspiracy.
Yvonne met her husband Jeff 30 years ago on a blind date.
It was basically love at first sight. We have the same needs and wants. He's my soulmate.
Jeff is a successful personal injury lawyer. They have 2 Aspen vacation homes, a private plane, and a place in the fashionable circuit of Houston charity balls.
Yvonne Stern filed for divorce, but just months later, she changed her mind and reconciled with her cheating husband, which begs the question, why would Mrs. Stern stand by him? She accompanied him to the police station as he turned himself in. The district attorney indicted Stern on 2 counts of solicitation of capital murder.
Jeffrey Stern has pleaded not guilty. His trial is in February.
We're going to talk to Stern's attorney.
Let me be perfectly clear. Jeff Stern is innocent of these charges. The only thing Jeff is guilty of is having had a marital transgression.
If called upon, Yvonne Stern says she will testify. Her husband is free on $1 million bond.
Prosecutors believe Geyser hired this middleman to find hitmen for her. The first time, February 2010, the house was sprayed with bullets. She wasn't at home. 28-year-old James Lowry worked at a tattoo parlor. He's awaiting trial for aggravated assault.
Yvonne convinces herself the shooting was random, but she was wrong.
The second time, April 2010, she and her family were home.
Just after 10 p.m., the doorbell rings.
I walked here, approaching the door, still saw no one, and then I see this man jump out of the wall with a gun in his hand and a smirk on his face and shot. The bullet went through one of the windows.
And this is?
It's where the bullet hit the floor and ricocheted on the opposite wall.
So it literally hit a foot from where you were standing?
Yes.
This time, the shooter missed.
This is the second accused hitman to go to trial.
Now he'll be tried on attempted capital murder charges.
38-year-old Newt Wynn was found guilty of aggravated assault and is now serving 45 years in prison. The family moved out of their house and into this luxury apartment complex.
Then, a month after the doorway shooting,
May 2010,
Yvonne is leaving her new apartment and heading for her SUV in a gated parking garage.
I see someone jump out of their car, and I see him coming towards me with a gun pointed to me. I jump in my car. He came to the car, pointed the gun to my head.
There's just a car window between Yvonne and a loaded gun. She begs for her life.
I was crying, hysterical, and yelling, and I said, "Don't do this." And I thought I almost got to him, you know, making him feel sorry. Okay, why am I doing this? So he proceeded to walk away, but he turned around and he just pointed and shot me.
The bullet went through her purse and makeup bag and then hit her in the stomach.
She plays dead, waiting for the gunman to drive away. Then, bleeding and in shock, she drives to a nearby gas station where she calls for help.
And when I seen the lady get out the car, bent down, saying that, I was shot.
This witness said weeks later, he received a threatening phone call.
And she said, you should have let this bee die. Now she's made my life a living hell.
When lying in the hospital, Yvonne was told her husband of 20 years was having an affair with 39-year-old Michelle Geyser, and that it was Geyser who planned the shootings.
Now, the third alleged hitman, Damian Flores, is standing trial.
Geyser pleaded guilty and was facing a life sentence when she cut a deal with the state. She agreed to testify against Jeff Stern in exchange for a 25-year sentence. Her story? Jeff was the brains of the operation, and prosecutors buy it.
You see him equally responsible as Michelle Geyser?
Yes. We believe that the evidence shows that he is guilty of solicitation of capital murder.
Today, Geyser, who has pleaded guilty to hiring the gunman, took the stand to testify against Flores. Sobbing, she admitted that she gave him $15,000 to make that third attempt on Yvonne Stern's life. I made a horrible mistake, she said. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret what I did. I'm very ashamed of what I've done. I feel bad for her and the people I've hurt because of my actions.
But that was before the latest twist. New evidence that Geyser may have been involved in a previous murder-for-hire scheme and other criminal activity.
This is a startling revelation, and it severely damages the prosecution's case. Their case relies on the believability of the Geyser woman.
After initially leaving him, Yvonne decided to forgive Jeff of his affair and take him back, a decision that fueled robust debate on TV.
3 separate attempts on her life, and she's still standing
by her man.
Unfortunately, it seems these murder-for-hire plots are not out of the ordinary. In fact, there have been several high-profile cases in just the past several years.
The amateurs apparently just don't realize what they're getting into, says former FBI agent Brad Garrett.
People believe in their sort of naive state that they can step to somebody else, have them commit the murder.
They think if that guy pulls the trigger, I'm clear.
Right. What they do is they step to a friend or an associate or someone that they knew in their past. And what happens in a vast majority of the time, the person they step to goes to law enforcement. There are a few people that get away with it, but very few. If in fact the murder is attempted, it's usually by somebody who either doesn't know what they're doing and they botch it. So the quality control is extremely poor in murder-for-hire cases.
The Sterns are apparently still together as a family. The couple, once again, holding hands in public. Yvonne Stern did file for divorce, but now she's changed her mind, perhaps accepting what seems to be her husband's defense. A man who could be described as smarter than the plot itself seems to be, that it was his girlfriend hiring the killers and that he had no idea.
Those who know Yvonne Stern says her 20-year marriage seemed happy and that she herself believes if her husband wanted her dead, he had every opportunity to succeed.
Yvonne says her marriage is even better after.
There's just no way. The affair, okay, I'll give you that one. But to plot to my murder? Absolutely not. It's ludicrous, it's preposterous. He had nothing to do with this and could not do anything with this. We are victims of a fatal attraction. We're getting past this. I forgive him for his indiscretions. We share more. We're closer, basically inseparable.
A whole new meaning to the vow of for better or worse.
Now to the arrest of a local attorney. Jeffrey Stern is charged with willfully filing a false tax return. This isn't the first time Stern has been in the headlines. Several years ago, he was accused of plotting with his mistress to kill his wife. Those charges were later dropped.
Jeffrey Stern is back in court, this time facing federal charges for tax evasion. I reached out to both of Stern's attorneys today multiple times to try to get a response to this indictment. They have yet to do so. Stern is due back here in federal court on Thursday for a detention hearing. Jeffrey Stern is now in federal custody. The Houston injury attorney has been charged and indicted on 21 counts related to tax violations. This week, the announcement of new charges against Stern, including witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and a slew of tax violations. Prosecutors say Stern and 4 co-conspirators were illegally recruiting clients through the payment and receipt of kickbacks in order to get personal injury cases and legal fees. They then tried to hide the payments and disguise their income from the IRS by filing false tax returns and other tax forms in 2013. When Stern learned of the investigation, he allegedly tried to obstruct justice by ordering his co-conspirators to destroy subpoenaed documents and to not cooperate with the investigation.
Houston attorney Jeffrey Stern was in court today charged with willfully filing a false tax return.
Well, that ruling just in from the judge, no bond for Jeffrey Stern. That decision came after 3.5 hours of arguments between Stern's attorneys upstairs and the attorney for the government accusing the Bel Air lawyer of engaging in an ongoing criminal conspiracy for more than a decade. The government's attorney says Stern engaged in tax fraud over those years to evade taxes and to hide the fact that he engaged in barratry, the illegal practice of paying runners to recruit defendants to be represented by Stern in personal injury cases. The government's lawyer went through the 187-paragraph indictment to try to show the judge that Stern had allegedly tampered with witnesses and tried to obstruct the government's investigation by hiding and destroying documents. Stern's lawyers argued that the government's case has yet to be proven and that Stern has proven that he's not a risk for flight, pointing out that he alerted the government that he was leaving on a European vacation earlier this month. He was arrested at the airport on his return Saturday. But in the end, Judge Peter Bray determined that, quote, there are no conditions by clear and convincing evidence, no conditions I could set that would ensure the safety of the community. And with that, he remanded Stern to custody to await trial. Now, that's not the end of the bond question. It will come up again before the presiding judge in this case, Lee Rosenthal, but that might not come for some time.
Well, that's going to do it for all of us here.
Thanks for listening. There's no set schedule for episode releases. I release them as soon as they're complete. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You can follow on Instagram or Twitter at Staged Crime Scenes Podcast.